Hi, welcome to my guide to taking HDRI panoramas. I hope you find this useful. The absolute essentials for taking a HDR panorama are a camera, definitely a tripod, a nodal ninja, and a fisheye lens. Technically, you don't necessarily need a fisheye lens, but a fisheye lens is going to make your life a lot easier when you're taking these panoramas. Let's unbox the nodal ninja and assemble it. If you're lucky, it's come pre-assembled inside here. If you're not so lucky, you might have to actually screw it together a bit. So let me show you how that works. Though it does come with sort of instructions, but they're sometimes a little bit unclear, but I think it's better for you to actually see. So let's take the parts out. Pretend that we're an international assassin assembling our sniper rifle. These two little bits here, we don't need just yet, but they come in handy later. We also need the base plate for the tripod. It's very important because the first thing we want to do is attach the base plate of the tripod to the base of the nodal ninja, which is this part here with the little spirit level, little target and the dial. This unscrews as well. So again, this might be unscrewed when you get it. Hopefully it isn't, but if not, this bit screws onto this bit with this bit in the middle. The base plate of the Manfrotto tripod comes with a nice little handle to screw it together, so it makes it a bit easier. Let's screw that on. You want this to be fairly tight because everything is going to be supported on this precarious looking set of arms on your tripod, and this is going to be dangling on the edge of it, so I get a bit paranoid thinking it's just going to fall off, so this bit definitely needs to be tight. That bit's done. Before we do this bit, let's attach this part to the camera. This little lip here should be flush with the back of the camera. It's got a kind of a normal screw here. There's no handle on it. If you've got long nails you might be able to do it, but unless you're carrying a screwdriver around with you, I would use a 10p piece or a 2p piece or something like that. So you want to screw this on, and again you want this bit to be tight as well. You do not want this to be loose. Not so tight that you can't undo it, but pretty tight. And here's a pitfall straight away, is you put it on, you switch the camera on, oh, you forgot to put the battery in. Okay, well I'll just open the battery. Oh, you can't open the battery compartment when this bit's attached. So remember to put the battery in first, or be prepared to unscrew it, put the battery in and do it again. Make sure the battery's charged as well. So again, this bit goes here, and you want this. There should be a little bit of movement possible. Let me just show you between the base plate like this. If it doesn't move, it's that tiny little Allen key lock thing that needs to be loosened a little bit. That's a bit trickier because you haven't got much you can use other than a proper little Allen key thing. So just be prepared for that. I do a bit of cycling, so I've got a bicycle multi-tool that has lots of little Allen keys in different sizes, so I actually would recommend getting something like that because it can come in useful when you're having to deal with this sort of stuff in the field, so to speak, which is what taking HDR panoramas is all about, is being out and about and improvising where necessary, or being prepared. So anyway, that's got a bit of movement in it. That will allow us to move this lip here so that it is parallel and flush with the back of the camera. Tighten this a bit here. Hopefully this is in shot, is in frame. Yeah, that looks good. Right, so you tighten that up. Now I wouldn't attach the nodal ninja to the camera until you've got this on the tripod, but I will show you how it connects in a moment anyway. But first of all, let's attach this arm If you loosen that screw, then you can rotate this. Let's tighten that up for now. We need to attach this to this, and you want to do it this way round. Okay, so that the screw is on the outside. This is where it gets annoyingly fiddly, and it will take me ages to do this because you've got to hold it with a couple of with your hand and then screw it on. You want the thicker of the two screws. Maybe if I put that through like this and do it this way. This is always a faff. Okay, there we go. Got it. So you want it tight when you're ready to take the photo, but loosen it just a little bit when you're adjusting it later. I'm going to point you to a video about why you need to adjust this and slide it back and forth. So that attaches like that. This loosens a bit so you can swing this around and adjust it. As I said earlier, ideally attach this to the tripod first and then attach the camera to the whole thing later. But let me just show you how it works here for now. So let's do that like that. So this is going to attach to here, and it's going to slide back and forth. Oops. It would help if I actually locked it in. There we go. You want that, again, fairly tight when you're not moving it, because again, you don't want it falling off, and also accuracy is a key. So the whole thing is going to look like this. It's going to sit on the tripod, and it's going to allow you to rotate. You need to loosen this a bit. It's going to allow you to rotate around that center point in very precise angles. And then it's also going to allow you to rotate the camera like this, or down the bottom, although you're going to run into certain issues when you do that. You're going to have to, this is why you loosen this, you can slide it up, and then you can completely rotate it down so it's looking up. Okay, I think that's that for now. Quick note about the tripod. It's probably going to come with the handle arm attached. You don't need that, it's just going to get in the way, and just loosen it. This screw just here, this one here. Oops. And it falls off. Yeah, but you don't need it, so remove it. And this is how, as I mentioned, don't have the camera on it when trying to fit it just to here. Take the camera off and fit this arm onto the tripod without the camera attached. So you want to lock it into position like that. You want it to be as stable as possible. So with that locked into position, now I can rotate this arm in very precise increments. So at the moment it's rotating 5 degrees. If it doesn't rotate, this is because this bit is too tight, so loosen this a little bit. Right, now we need to attach the fisheye lens. So first things first, let's remove the kit lens. This is the lens release button. If you press that and rotate anti-clockwise, the lens comes off. In the camera bag, you should find one of these. This is to protect the back of the lens. Put that in your camera bag, keep it safe. Now this is the Sigma 8mm fisheye lens. there are 3 types of fisheye lens, I think, available from stores. I'm going to be using the 8mm. The 8mm, they're all usable, and they all work in roughly the same way. They just cover slightly different fields of view. First, unscrew, twist off the cap, protector cap. It's got a little red dot just here, so if we line the red dot up, that should then fit in, and then turn clockwise until it clicks. There we go. The lens cap comes in 2 parts, because you can take just the lens cap off. Here comes my cat to help. Isn't this typical? Hold on a second. Off you get, come on. Sorry about that. So you take the lens cap off, but then there's also this second kind of ring here. Take this off. If you look through the camera with this ring on, you'll see the vision is kind of vignetted, circled by like a circular frame. We want as much of the image exposed as possible, so take this off as well. I mean, what I normally do with this particular one, I'm not sure if it's the same with the other 2 fisheye lenses, is I treat the whole thing as if it were just one lens cap, so just slide it off. It's a bit risky, to be honest, in my opinion. I can't see, it doesn't feel very safe, but there you go, just take that off. So now you've got the fisheye lens. You want it on manual focus, because you don't want it constantly trying to refocus, because you want consistency in your images when you take them. What we need to do is find the no parallax point on the lens. When you rotate a camera normally, if you're holding the camera and you're taking a series of photos and you're going, I'll take a picture here, and then you turn a bit, I'll take a picture here, I'll take a picture here. What's happening to the camera is it's not just rotating, it's translating. It's going around in a circle like this. It's actually moving, it's translating as well as rotating. It's important when we're taking panoramas for there to be no translation at all, because we don't want any parallax. We don't want foreground objects to move differently to background objects when the camera rotates. If you find a no parallax point, when that camera rotates using the Nodal Ninja, there will be no relative motion or difference between an object up close and an object in the distance. I'm going to put up a link to a video about how to find the no parallax point, because there's a much better video than I could hope to do at the moment, and it's very, very nicely done, very simple and straightforward. Once you find the no parallax point, which is a combination of your camera and your lens, you can write down the values, because on the Nodal Ninja, let me just grab this across without causing chaos. If you can see, there are marks just here. These are very important, so you can note down the position, the slidey position, that results in a no parallax effect happening. But as I said, I'll link to a video that explains that nicely. So there you are. Now the fisheye lens is attached to the camera, and you're almost ready to go. The next thing is to set your camera up ready for shooting. You need to know 2 things now. What's the dynamic range of the scene? How much does the light go from dark to bright? And how many shots you're going to need to take to capture the entire scene? Let's do the dynamic range first, and a couple of settings you'll definitely need to do. So first up, you definitely do not want ISO to be auto. You want ISO to be something relatively low if you can get away with it, because you don't want much grain, but 200 to 400, that should help. So make sure ISO is definitely not at auto. You also do not want white balance to be set to auto either. Ideally, you'd shoot a custom white balance by getting a bit of white paper, taking a photo of it, and then calibrating your camera to use that photo of a white paper to determine a white balance. If not, then you can make a best guess and choose the lighting condition you're in. So you've done that. We've changed the ISO to a manual setting, and we've changed the white balance to a manual setting. Another thing you need to do is to make sure that the camera is not applying any kind of color corrections or adjustments. This little symbol here will tell you the mode it's in. You want it in N, which is neutral. You can use the down arrow just here and select neutral. All the others will apply some kind of color correction. So we want it neutral. The next thing to do is to determine your f-stop you want to use. Again, you want a fairly high f-stop because you want everything to be in focus. You don't want any kind of blurriness with this kind of shot. So the procedure that I do is to start off in AV mode, aperture priority mode. So turn the dial to AV mode. Make sure you've set your ISO to the setting that you want. Make sure your white balance is what you want it to be. And then, one more thing, make sure that the metering mode is what you want it to be. There are a bunch of different metering modes. Technically, spot metering is going to be most accurate because that's going to find the exposure shutter speed for an actual totally precise point within your scene. You can experiment with this. You might want to start off with evaluative metering or maybe center weighted averages, but I would maybe experiment with that if things are not working quite right for you. Okay, with that set up, you now want to point the camera at the darkest point in your scene. So I'm just going to do that. And then you want to half depress the shutter release button. Don't actually take a picture. And what will happen is, based on, if you can see here, sorry, based on where you're pointing and the f-stop, you see the shutter exposure time there, which is changing. That's going to tell you what the camera figures is the perfect exposure time, shutter speed, for that darkest spot. Write that down. So this is between 0.8 and 1 second. So that's very long exposure. You write that down. Now you point it at the brightest point in your scene. And you do the same thing. Can you see it off there? So if I point it up at the light, it goes to 1/15 of a second. Write that down. You've now got the shutter speed for the darkest point in your scene and the lightest point in your scene. And now you want to choose the shutter speed that's midway between those 2 points. And it will change depending on the lighting conditions of the wherever you are, whatever environment you're in. So you've done that. Write those 2 values down. That's going to be 3 exposures. The last thing we want to do, because we want more exposures than that to get a proper high dynamic range, we want to switch auto bracketing on. So go to menu. It's the second one along, and it's exposure compensation AEB. Select that. This will automatically take photos at various different exposure compensations above and below the shutter speed that you've actually taken. This is going to use the dial to decide how many stops up and down you want it to take. Again, it's going to take, depending on the environment you're in, this is going to be a different kind of number. Try it to begin with on 1. You'll probably have some fairly good luck with that. That means, say if I took, I set my lowest exposure time is a second. It's going to take a second exposure time. Then it's automatically going to take whatever the stop below 1 second exposure time is, and then it's automatically going to take a stop one quicker than a second. So you're going to get 3 exposures for the price of 1 button press. So you want to select that and go OK. Go back to here. The AEB stuff will only work when you change the drive mode here, which is this left button, to one of these timed settings. 2 means, 2 seconds. Press the button, 2 seconds later, it's going to take 3 exposures. If you set it to self-timer, it should give you 10 seconds, which is quite necessary when you're shooting the shots where the camera's pointing straight down, because your feet are going to be in the image and you don't want your feet to be in the image. So you ideally want to press the button. It'll give you 10 seconds to get completely out of shot. Now, the 8mm fisheye lens covers almost 180 degrees of view, so you actually have to run away from the tripod much further than you might anticipate, because you do not want your feet in shot. Okay, so we've done the exposure time, the exposure compensation, and the timer. Yeah, so then you're set up then so to take 9 shots, because you've got 3 exposures that you wrote down covering the darkest point in the scene, the brightest point in the scene, and the middle point in the scene. But then you've also enabled exposure compensation that's going to take 2 photos either side of each exposure that you take. So in total you'll get 9 photos. So the next thing is, how many photos do you need to take to capture an entire environment? That depends on 2 things: the lens and the camera. The wider the angle, the lens, the less photos you have to take, which in general is a good thing. You want to take the least amount of photos because you can do it in the quickest amount of time, in the shortest amount of time, which when you're doing this kind of thing is so important. Not just because if you're on a film set, you're a nuisance to everyone else and they don't like having to stop everything and move out the way while this person comes in and sets up a camera on their tripod and does lots of tests and is gradually moving the camera, rotating the camera around. But it also makes a difference if you're on location and you're out in the outside, because then lighting conditions change. And PT GUI, the software that we use to stitch these images together, is very sensitive to anything changing in the scene. And the biggest worry is normally the sun. If you have a cloudy day, but it's not completely cloudy and it's also windy, the sun is going to be continually coming in and out of the clouds. It's going to be a nightmare. It's going to really screw up PT GUI's ability to stitch these photos together. So you want to be quick. So the wider the angle of the lens, the better, because of the less amount of photos you'll need to take. I say with the camera it makes a difference as well, because the field of view a lens says it can take is dependent on the type of camera. Whether the camera is a full frame camera, that means that the sensor inside the camera is exactly the same as a 35mm sensor, and all of that sensor gets exposed. Sensors in something like the Canon 550D are cropped sensors, so not all of the sensor is exposed to what the lens can see. It's complicated. It means that the field of view, it means that this lens is technically a little bit more zoomed. It gives you more of a telephoto effect than it says on the actual side of the lens and the product description, because that whole image is being cropped a little bit into the sensor. Anyway, don't get too caught up worrying about that kind of thing, because I'm going to provide a link, an internet link that has a table that tells you how many shots you need to take depending on the camera that you've got and the focal length of the lens you're using. I can tell you straight off that the 550D with the Sigma 8mm fisheye lens requires a total of 6 shots, or is it 8 shots? Let me just check my notes. It needs 6 shots around and 2 shots. One of what we call the zenith, pointing straight up, and another pointing straight down, which is the nadir. So it's 8 shots in total, and that will then capture the entire 360-degree environment. Importantly, it means that each image going around will have about a 33% overlap with the previous image that you took. Again, this is important for PT GUI. PT GUI, the software, the stitching software, needs about, I think, between 25 and 33% overlap between the images so that it can figure out what to stitch to what. So yeah, that's important. But I'll provide an internet link with an exhaustive list of data telling you camera bodies and lens combinations and how many pictures it will need and the degrees that you'll need to rotate it around each one. Although you can work that yourself. If you know that it's 6 degrees around and it's 360 degree image you need to take, then that's 60 degrees each rotation, like that. Okay, you've got the tripod set up, got the Nodal Ninja ready to go. You want to fit it to the tripod. Make sure it's secure. You do not want any wobble on that. Got this set up here. Checklist of things that you've done with the camera. You have made sure you're shooting in manual mode. You have determined that you're not in automatic ISO, you're not automatic white balance. You have chosen an f-stop, and you have determined the brightest exposure, the darkest exposure, and then you figured out the middle point. You've then gone into the camera, you've switched automatic exposure compensation on, and you've decided how many stops either side of your exposures you want. Try on 1 to begin with. And finally, you have put the timer release on, because you don't want to press the button because you want it to be completely steady. You want to press the button and then it will wait 2 seconds and then it will take the photo. You've also figured out how many photos you're going to need based on the lens body and the lens combination. Okay, we've attached the Nodal Ninja, and we've also figured out the no parallax point. You've watched the video and you've experimented with that and you've written it down, so you know when you get out in the field how to set up your Nodal Ninja. Let's now attach the camera to the Nodal Ninja. Go. Make sure everything's nice and tight. Reset this. There's nice little handy little markers on here. So move it around until the marker is on 0. Make sure the camera's on. You've got the timer set up. Press and hold. 2 seconds. And it's taken 3 photos based on the exposure that you've set. Now look at the notes that you wrote. Say you'll start it, oh yeah, you want to shoot in the same pattern. You always want to shoot either lowest, middle, high, or highest, middle, low. You want to repeat that pattern because PT GUI can recognize a sequence of patterns of shots, and then again it will make your life easier. So you've taken the first exposure, now you change it to the next one. Say that was the lowest one. Actually no, say that's the highest one. Then you change the exposure dial down to the medium value. You get ready, half press. Takes 3 exposures. You can probably hear it was taking, it was a longer exposure time that time. And then you move down to your lowest exposure. Press, 2 seconds. 3 exposures, really long this time. They're going to probably look quite blown out on the longest exposures, and they're going to look quite dark on the darkest exposures. But if you've accurately measured what the darkest and the lightest exposure should be, PT GUI should manage to stitch these together no problem. So you've taken 3 exposures with 2 compensated exposure values either side. So you've taken 9 photos now for that one position. You look at your notes and you know that, right, because I'm using a Canon 550 with the 8mm Sigma lens, I need to rotate it now 60 degrees. Readjust your exposure shutter speed back up to the shortest one. And repeat the whole process again. There you go. So you do that. until you've covered the entire 360 degrees. Then you want to cover the zenith and the nadir, which is pointing down. The nadir pointing down, both of these have their own issues. The nadir pointing down is you're going to have to change the shutter release timer. First of all, you want to loosen this one here, rotate it up, and if you've watched Finding the Nodal, the non-parallax point, then you'll know what to do here. You rotate it up and then you tighten it, and you look through, and your little focus point should be directly in the middle of this little target symbol. You want to change that timer speed to the middle setting where it says self-timer remote control. That will give you 10 seconds to get out of the way once you press the button. And you really do want to get out of the way. So again, it took 3 exposures. Go through the whole process again, take 3 shots with the auto bracketing, taking you 2 additional shots either side of that shot. Depending on the camera, when you shoot the zenith, you'll have to do 1 adjustment, because at the moment this 550D is right at the end of the arm, which means I can't actually completely rotate it. So you will have to loosen this a little bit and then shift it up and tighten it. If you've set up your no parallax point correctly, you should be fine. You should be fairly confident that when you rotate it like that and duck and take your pictures pointing up, it should be fine. One annoying thing that I found with the Canon is that it won't let you change the settings if it's pointing straight up. You will have to, each time you take 1 exposure, or it'll take 3 exposures obviously in total, you have to move it up, twiddle the exposure shutter speed dial, and then rotate it back down again. There you go. That's all there is to it. Well, I hope you found that useful. Best of luck. You're kind of going to need it. Shooting HDRI panoramas, as I've probably already mentioned, is a tricky thing. One of them, and what makes it really tricky is you don't know if it's necessarily worked until you've taken all those photos, got back to the lab or your room or your computer, and it doesn't work, and it's all been for nothing. So my advice to you would be, to begin with, shoot interiors. Don't shoot outside. Don't shoot exteriors. There's too much out of your control when you're shooting exteriors. Whereas if you shoot interiors, you're a little bit more guaranteed that the light's going to stay the same, and there'll be no wind moving trees or branches or anything like that. So give interiors a shot, and if it works out, then go for super extra special marks by doing some exterior ones. Thanks. Back to you, Ant.